Logistics Solutions provides order fulfillment services for .com merchants. The company uses a predetermined variable overhead rate based on direct labor hours. In the most recent month, 120,000 items were shipped to customers using 2,300 direct labor hours. The company incurred a total of $7,360 in variable overhead costs. According to the company's standards, 0.02 direct labor hours are required to fulfill an order for one item, and the variable overhead rate is $3.25 per direct labor hour. What variable overhead costs should have been incurred to fill the orders for 120,000 items? And how much does this differ from the actual variable overhead cost? Finally, break down the variance into rate and efficiency variances. Let's begin by calculating our total direct labor hours allowed. We shipped 120,000 items, and our standard direct labor cost or hours per item is 0.02. So this should have taken us 2,400 direct labor hours. Our standard variable overhead rate or predetermined variable overhead rate is $3.25 per hour, which means our total variable overhead cost at standard should have been $7,800 to ship these items. Our actual variable overhead cost was only $7,360. This is a $440 difference. And since our actual overhead was less than our standard overhead allowed, we would identify or say that this is a favorable variance. Let's go ahead now and break our $440 favorable variance into rate and efficiency components. Again, we're going to compare actuals with standards. Let's begin by picking up our standard hours allowed, which we had just calculated above at 2,400 standard hours, and that was our 120,000 items times 0.02 direct labor hours per item. We're also going to back into a somewhat of an actual variable overhead rate. It's not truly a rate that we pay, but it's useful for identifying whether our rate variance is favorable or unfavorable. If we take our actual variable overhead cost of $7,360 and divide it by our actual direct labor hours of 2,300, we can come up with a actual variable overhead rate of $3.20, and we'll use that again to compare with our standard rate when we identify whether our rate variance is favorable or unfavorable. Completing our columns, 2,300 actual hours times $3.25 standard variable overhead rate gives us $7,475. Our standard variable overhead cost we calculated above as $7,800, and that's simply again our standard hours times our standard rate. Our rate variance then is the difference between the $7,475 and the $7,360, and our $115 variance we would say is favorable, since this actual rate that we calculated of $3.20 is less than our standard or predetermined overhead variable rate of $3.25. From an efficiency perspective, our variance is $325, and again we would say that this is a favorable variance since our actual hours of 2,300 was less than our standard allowed of 2,400. Our total variance is the combination of our rate and efficiency variances, and since both of them are favorable, we would come up with a $440 total favorable variance. And this again was what we calculated earlier by taking the difference between our actual overhead and our standard. And again, since the actual cost is less than standard, we would say that this variance is a favorable variance.